The 1929 stock market collapse, often known as the Great Crash, was a dramatic decrease in U.S. stock market values in 1929 that contributed to the 1930s Great Depression. The Great Depression lasted almost 10 years and affected both industrialized and non-industrialized countries across the globe. Hey guys, welcome back to our channel. Today's question of the video is, what was the Great Depression of 1930? So let's get into our time machine and take a look at the story of the Great Depression. The stock market crash of 1929. In the 18 months leading up to the crash on Black Thursday, October 24, 1929, the value of the American stock market risen dramatically in a frenzy of speculative purchasing. On that day, and on Black Tuesday, October 29, panic gripped the stock market as millions of shares fell in value. The October 1929 market crash was simply the beginning of the market's demise. By mid-November, the stock market had lost a third of its value from September, and by 1932, when the market bottomed, equities had lost 90% of their value. A share of U.S. steel that had sold for $262 prior to the crisis sold for $22 in 1932. The stock market fall marked the start of the Great Depression, although it was just one of many core causes of the Depression. The economic crisis was exacerbated by a weak banking system, additional decline in already low farm prices, and industrial overproduction. The devastating Holy Smoot Tariff of 1930, which raised average tariff rates to over 60%. The Great Depression. Millions of individuals were forced out of their work as a direct result of the ripple impact that the Great Depression had on the economy of the United States. By 1930, there were 4.3 million people without jobs. By 1931, that number had increased to 8 million, and by 1932, it had reached 12 million. At the beginning of 1933, there were an astounding 13 million people without jobs, and the unemployment rate had reached an all-time high of 25%. Individuals who were successful in keeping their positions sometimes had to accept wage reductions of 30% or more. Americans who were without a job stood in lengthy breadlines, begged for food, or peddled apples on street corners to make ends meet. An individual who worked as a social worker in Chicago once penned the following in a piece: "We witnessed want and despair wandering the streets, and our friends, smart, thrifty families, reduced to poverty." In the 3 years that followed 1929, more than one-third of the nation's banks went out of business. It was commonplace to see long lines of desperate and hopeless people waiting outside of banks in the hope of retrieving their cash. As banks failed, a lot of regular people lost their money for their whole lives. The crisis was especially difficult on people in agricultural occupations. In addition to a decrease in the value of crops, the Dust Bowl was caused by a series of dust storms that were triggered by a severe drought in the states of Oklahoma, Texas, and Kansas. Sharecroppers, who might be either white or black, were subjected to conditions of almost unthinkable depravity and abject poverty throughout the South. Since racism is so ingrained in our society, Black Americans have historically had much greater rates of unemployment than whites. The United States was not the only country affected by the global financial crisis. The Great Depression had an impact not just on European countries, but also on countries all around the world. The economic downturn of the 1930s had a role in both the coming to power of Adolf Hitler in Germany and the escalation of international tensions. The global economy continued to contract throughout the decade. As a result of the collapse of the stock market, consumer confidence plummeted, which led to a decrease in both spending and investment. This, in turn, caused manufacturing facilities and other types of enterprises to slow down and start laying off employees. Wages declined, which led to a loss in purchasing power for those people who were fortunate enough to keep their jobs. Many people in the United States, who were compelled to make purchases on credit, ended up falling into debt, which led to a steady rise in the number of defaults and repossessed properties. The global adherence to the gold standard, which connected countries across the world in fixed currency exchange, was a contributing factor in the spread of economic troubles stemming from the United States to the rest of the world, particularly in Europe. Economic impact. Human misery was the Great Depression's most destructive consequence. Global productivity and living standards fell significantly in a short period of time. In the early 1930s, up to one-fourth of the labor force in industrialized countries was unable to find work. While things began to improve by the mid-1930s, full recovery did not occur until the end of the decade. The Great Depression and the governmental responses to it also had a significant impact on the global economy. Most notably, it hastened, if not caused, the demise of the worldwide gold standard. Although a system of fixed currency exchange rates was re-established after World War II under the Bretton Woods system, the world's economies never embraced it with the same passion and zeal that they had brought to the gold standard. By 1973, fixed exchange rates had been replaced by floating rates. Recovery from the Great Depression. It is widely assumed that World War II supplied the boost that lifted the U.S. economy out of the Great Depression. From 1940 and 1943, the number of jobless employees fell by 7,050,000, but the number of people in military duty increased by 8,590,000. During the war, business investment decreased. Government spending on the war effort outpaced growth in actual GDP. These statistics, however, are questionable since we know that official estimates of the value of munitions spending, to mention one key area, were dramatically overstated as the war continued. Moreover, stringent price restrictions, rationing, and government production control make data on GDP, consumption, investment, and the price level less useful. Consumers' recovery occurred with the conclusion of the war, when they could once again buy things that were unavailable during the war and unaffordable throughout the 1930s. Could the Great Depression happen again? It could, but such an event is unlikely because the Federal Reserve Board is unlikely to sit idly by while the money supply falls by one-third. The wisdom gained in the years since the 1930s probably gives our policymakers enough insight to make decisions that will keep the economy out of such a major depression. That's all for this video. Please like, subscribe, share, and comment on this video if you enjoy it. Till then, take care. Thanks for watching.